My name is Audrey, and I'm 32 years old. I still remember that Christmas dinner like it happened yesterday. The perfectly roasted turkey, the gleaming silverware, my mother's immaculate dining room. And then those 5 words that shattered everything: "We're ashamed of you." What my mother didn't expect was my response, one simple truth that made her cry in front of our entire family. Let me tell you how everything unfolded. If you're watching this, drop a comment letting me know where you're from and hit that like and subscribe button. Trust me, you'll want to hear how standing up for yourself can change everything. I was born into a family that valued tradition, success, and appearances above all else. My mother, Martha, was the unquestioned authority in our household, a woman with impeccable taste and impossibly high standards. She'd grown up in a wealthy Boston family where achievement wasn't celebrated but expected. My father, Harold, was quiet and distant, a successful accountant who rarely challenged my mother's opinions or decisions. Then there was my older brother, James, 4 years my senior and the golden child of our family. He'd followed the perfect script my mother had written for him: top of his class in high school, Harvard Medical School, marriage. To Catherine, a dentist from a good family, and 2 perfectly behaved children, Emma and Thomas. James lived in a beautiful colonial home just 30 minutes from my parents, allowing my mother to be the doting grandmother she'd always imagined herself becoming. And then there was me. I'd always been the family outlier. While I'd done well in school, I'd never been exceptional like James. I'd shown artistic talent from a young age, filling sketchbooks with designs and illustrations. My mother viewed this as a nice hobby, but nothing to build a future on. She'd pushed me toward practical fields, medicine in particular. "Audrey, with your grades and attention to detail, you could be a wonderful pediatrician," she would say. "Think of the stability, the respect." For a while, I'd tried to follow her blueprint. I'd enrolled as a pre-med major in college, pushing through chemistry and biology courses that left me drained and uninspired. It wasn't until my junior year that I finally admitted to myself that I was pursuing someone else's dream. After weeks of anxiety, I'd changed my major to graphic design, finding joy and purpose in my coursework for the first time. My mother's disappointment had been palpable. A designer. That's not a career, Audrey. That's what people do while figuring out their real career. Despite her disapproval, I'd graduated and built a modest career in graphic design, working for a small marketing agency in Chicago, far enough from my parents' Massachusetts home to establish some independence. My salary wasn't impressive, but I loved the creativity of my work and the satisfaction of seeing my designs come to life. My personal life was another source of my mother's disapproval. I'd dated Jack for nearly 5 years, a kind and supportive photographer I'd met through work. We'd built a comfortable life together, sharing a small apartment and a rescue cat named Pixel. When Jack had proposed 6 months earlier, I'd surprised myself by saying no. Something didn't feel right, though. I couldn't articulate exactly what. We'd tried to move past it, but the relationship had slowly unraveled, ending with Jack moving out 3 months before that fateful Christmas dinner. My mother had liked Jack mostly because he represented stability. "At least he has a good head on his shoulders," she would say, though she found his career choice almost as disappointing as mine. When she'd learned about our breakup, her response had been a deep sigh and, "Audrey, you're 32. You can't afford to be so picky." The rare good memories with my mother were precious precisely because of their scarcity. I remembered her teaching me to bake her famous apple pie when I was 10, her hands guiding mine as we crimped the edges of the crust. There was the time she'd defended me fiercely when a middle school teacher had unfairly accused me of cheating, and I cherished the memory of her proud smile at my college graduation, a brief moment when she seemed truly satisfied with me. These memories kept me coming back year after year, hoping for her approval. Despite the criticism, the comparisons to James, the thinly veiled disappointment, I continued to hope that someday she would see me, really see me, and accept the person I had become, rather than lamenting the person I hadn't. My father's role in all this was complicated. He rarely criticized me directly, but supported my mother through his silence. Occasionally, when we were alone, he would show interest in my work or ask about my life in Chicago with genuine curiosity. But these moments never translated into advocacy when my mother was present. "Your mother wants what's best for you," he would say when I expressed frustration. "She's always pushed all of us to be our best selves." But I'd begun to wonder if her vision of my best self was someone I would even recognize, let alone want to be. The invitation to Christmas dinner had arrived via text from my mother in early December. "Christmas dinner at 5:00 p.m. sharp. We're having prime rib this year. Let me know if you're bringing anyone. No warmth, no we miss you, just logistical information. I'd stared at the message for a long time before replying. I'll be there, just me this year. Part of me had considered declining. The thought of enduring another holiday of subtle jabs and comparisons to James's perfect life was exhausting. But a deeper part of me still yearned for connection, for the family I wished we could be, rather than the one we were. In the weeks leading up to Christmas, I'd thrown myself into creating the perfect gift. I decided to design a custom photo album chronicling our family history, including scanned photos from my grandparents' era through recent family gatherings. I'd spent hours selecting the right images, designing layouts that told our story, and writing captions that captured meaningful moments. I'd had the album professionally printed and bound in rich leather, hoping that my mother would recognize the thought and skill that had gone into it. As Christmas approached, my anxiety grew. I called my best friend Sophia, the one person who truly understood my complicated family dynamics. What am I going to say when they ask about Jack? I lamented, sorting through my closet for an outfit my mother wouldn't critique. Or when my mother inevitably asks why I haven't looked for a real job yet. Audrey, listen to me, Sophia said firmly. You are a successful, independent adult with a career you love. You don't need their validation. Set boundaries and don't let them make you feel small. That's easier said than done, I sighed, pulling out a burgundy sweater that was both festive and conservative enough for my mother's taste. You know how I get around them, it's like I'm 16 again. Then prepare yourself, Sophia advised. Think about what they might say and how you want to respond. And remember, you can always leave if it gets too much. I'd packed my overnight bag the day before Christmas Eve, including the carefully wrapped photo album and smaller gifts for James's family. The drive from Chicago to my parents' home in Massachusetts would take me nearly 15 hours, so I planned to leave at dawn. As I loaded my car in the dark morning hours, a light snow was falling, adding to the Christmas atmosphere. The long drive gave me time to think, to rehearse responses to the questions I knew would come, to brace myself for the criticism I might face. I thought about previous Christmas gatherings, the tension that always seemed to simmer beneath the surface of our picture-perfect holiday celebrations. Last year, my mother had commented on my weight within 10 minutes of my arrival. The year before, she'd questioned my career choice during the main course. Would this year be any different? Part of me hoped that the spirit of the season might soften my mother's sharp edges. Perhaps the joy of having her family together would override her need to control and critique. I imagined a warm, welcome, genuine interest in my life, a meal where everyone felt valued and accepted. As I drove through Pennsylvania and into New York, these fantasies sustained me. But as I crossed into Massachusetts, reality began to set in. The familiar landmarks of my hometown triggered memories of past disappointments, and my stomach tightened with anxiety. For a brief moment, sitting at a red light just 5 miles from my parents' home, I considered turning around. I could text some excuse about bad weather or illness. I could drive back to Chicago and spend a quiet Christmas in my apartment with takeout and old movies. But I didn't turn around. I drove on, clinging to that stubborn hope that this time might be different. I arrived at my parents' colonial-style home at 4:30 p.m. on Christmas Eve, just as the winter sun was setting. The house was exactly as I remembered, imposing and immaculate, with perfectly strung white lights outlining the roof and windows. My mother's decorating style was elegant and restrained, nothing like the colourful, eclectic approach I'd taken in my own apartment. I took a deep breath before ringing the doorbell, my arms laden with gifts and my overnight bag. My mother answered the door, her expression a mixture of assessment and mild disappointment. "Audrey," she said, giving me a quick, stiff hug. "You look tired. Was the traffic terrible?" 15 hours on the road will do that to you, I replied, trying to keep my tone light. "Merry Christmas, Mum." My father appeared behind her, his smile more genuine. "There's my girl," he said, taking the bags from my arms. "Good to have you home, Audrey." Inside the house was warm and filled with the scent of pine from the 12-foot Christmas tree in the living room and cinnamon from whatever was baking in the kitchen. James, Catherine, and their children had already arrived. Emma, age 8, and Thomas, age 6, rushed to greet me. "Aunt Audrey!" Emma exclaimed, throwing her arms around my waist. "Did you bring us presents?" "Emma," Catherine admonished from the doorway. "That's not polite." Catherine was tall and slender with perfectly highlighted blonde hair, and the kind of casual elegance my mother approved of. She was unfailingly polite to me, but there was always a distance between us, an unspoken alliance with my mother in their shared view of what constituted a successful woman. "It's okay," I laughed, hugging Emma back. "And yes, I brought presents, but they'll have to wait until tomorrow morning." Thomas hovered shyly behind his sister until I knelt down to his level. "I heard you lost 2 teeth since I saw you last," I said, and he grinned to show me the gaps. James emerged from the living room, drink in hand. My brother had always been handsome in a conventional way, with our father's height and our mother's confident bearing. He gave me a one-armed hug. "Good to see you, sis," he said. "How was the drive?" Shh. Before I could answer, my mother interjected. James and his family arrived hours ago, and they had to coordinate around the children's schedules. "They're staying through New Year's. How long can you stay, Audrey?" The question carried its usual implication that my time wasn't as constrained by important obligations as James's was. "Just until the day after tomorrow," I replied. "I need to get back for some client projects." My mother's slight frown communicated her opinion of these client projects without her having to say a word. "James just received a promotion," she continued. "He'll be heading the pediatric surgical department starting in January." "That's wonderful," I said sincerely, turning to my brother. "Congratulations, James." My brother at least had the grace to look slightly embarrassed at our mother's boasting. "It's not official yet," he said. "Still some details to work out." "It's as good as official," my mother insisted. "And Catherine's practice is thriving too. They're looking at building a new home in Brookline. Tell Audrey about the plans, Catherine." As Catherine launched into details about square footage and custom cabinetry, I noticed my father giving me a sympathetic glance. He moved closer under the pretense of taking my coat. "She's been like this all day," he muttered. "Just let it wash over you." The next hour passed in a blur of thinly veiled comparisons. My mother guided the conversation to topics that highlighted James and Catherine's success. Their children's achievements at their exclusive private school, their recent vacation to the French Riviera, the charity gala where Catherine had served on the planning committee. When I tried to share news about a major branding project I'd recently completed for a well-known coffee chain, my mother cut me off mid-sentence. "That reminds me, James, tell Audrey about the research paper you're publishing. The New England Journal of Medicine, wasn't it?" Eventually, my mother asked for help in the kitchen, a request that felt more like a summons. As we prepared vegetables for the Christmas Eve dinner, her criticism continued. "You're cutting those carrots too thick, Audrey. They won't cook evenly," she said, taking the knife from my hand to demonstrate. "Like this, see, I thought you would have learned to cook properly by now, living on your own all these years." I bit back a retort about how I'd been cooking for myself successfully for over a decade, and instead tried to change the subject. "The house looks beautiful, Mom. I love the new dining room chandelier." "Yes, we had it custom made. It's important to invest in quality pieces," she replied, with the implication that this was a lesson I had yet to learn. "Speaking of which, that sweater looks a bit worn at the elbows, doesn't it?" Each comment was a small cut, none fatal on its own, but collectively wearing down my defences. I found myself becoming quieter, retreating into the role of the disappointing daughter that seemed to have been assigned to me. As we arranged the table settings, my mother's phone buzzed with a text. She read it and smiled, the first genuine smile I'd seen since my arrival. "That's wonderful," she said, more to herself than to me. "Perfect timing." "Who was that?" I asked, placing crystal water glasses at each setting. "You'll see," she replied with an enigmatic smile that sent a chill of foreboding through me. Dinner on Christmas Eve was a formal affair in my parents' household. The dining room table was extended to its full length and covered with my grandmother's lace tablecloth. The best china, crystal and silver were arranged with precision, and tapered candles cast a warm glow over everything. My father carved the roast with practiced skill, while my mother directed the passing of side dishes. James sat at one end of the table, mirroring our father at the other, a visual representation of the family hierarchy that placed him as the heir apparent. Conversation flowed around safe topics, at first the unusually mild winter weather, a neutral discussion of a popular television series. Everyone had watched the children's excitement about Santa's imminent arrival. Then James cleared his throat. "So I haven't told everyone yet, but I've been approached about serving on the hospital board. Youngest member in their history." "James, that's incredible," my mother beamed. "Harold, did you hear that the hospital board?" "Well deserved," my father nodded. "You've always shown leadership potential, even as a boy." Catherine placed her hand over James's. "I'm so proud of you, honey, though it means even less time at home." Her complaint carried no real weight, tempered by obvious pride. "And we're finalising plans for the new house," James continued. 4,000 square feet, 5 bedrooms, a home office for each of us, and a playroom for the kids. The architect's renderings came in yesterday. You must show us after dinner, my mother enthused. I've been thinking about how we might help with the interior design. Perhaps that crystal chandelier would look perfect in your foyer. I took a long sip of wine, trying to appear genuinely interested while fighting a growing sense of inadequacy. When the conversation finally turned to me, it felt less like genuine interest and more like an obligation to include me. "And how are things in Chicago, Audrey?" Catherine asked politely. "Still with that marketing firm?" "Yes, though I've been taking on more independent clients lately," I replied, seizing the opportunity to talk about my work. I just finished a complete rebrand for Blue Mountain Coffee. They're a regional chain expanding nationally, and they needed a cohesive visual identity across all platforms. I developed their new logo packaging design web presence. "Speaking of coffee," my mother interrupted, "James and Catherine brought back the most wonderful beans from their trip to Italy last spring. You should try it before you leave." I fell silent, the enthusiasm for my work effectively squashed. Audrey's always been creative. My father offered a rare attempt to bring the conversation back to me. "Remember those drawings she used to do, the detailed ones of buildings and landscapes?" Before I could appreciate this small recognition, my mother redirected again. "Yes, she always enjoyed her little art projects. Emma shows similar talent, don't you think, Catherine? Though of course she excels academically as well. Her teacher says she might be gifted in mathematics." The doorbell rang, providing a momentary reprieve from the conversation. Who could that be on Christmas Eve? My father wondered. My mother's smile was knowing. That must be Aunt Linda. And I believe she's bringing a guest. My mother's sister Linda was the black sheep of her family, a twice-divorced travel agent who lived what my mother considered a frivolous life. Despite disapproving of Linda's choices, my mother maintained a relationship with her, perhaps as a reminder of the path not taken. Linda burst into the dining room in a cloud of expensive perfume, her arms laden with gift bags. "Merry Christmas, darlings," she exclaimed, kissing cheeks and distributing packages. "Sorry I'm late, but I brought reinforcements." And wine, lots of wine. Behind her stood a tall, familiar figure that made my heart sink. Mark Thompson, my college boyfriend, the man my mother had always considered the one that got away. "Mark," my mother exclaimed with clearly feigned surprise. "What a wonderful coincidence that you're in town for the holidays." Mark smiled, his confident posture unchanged since college. He'd always been conventionally handsome in a way that photographed well and impressed parents. Strong jaw, neat haircut, clear blue eyes. He now wore an expensive-looking suit that screamed corporate success. "Mrs. Stanley, sir," he said, kissing my mother's cheek. "You look wonderful as always. Thank you for allowing Linda to drag me along. Linda mentioned you were back east for business, and I insisted she bring you," my mother said, shooting me a meaningful glance. "Audrey, look who's here. Isn't this a lovely surprise?" The calculated nature of this coincidence was painfully obvious. My mother had orchestrated this reunion, another attempt to steer my life in what she considered the right direction. "Mark," I said, rising from my seat with a forced smile. "What a surprise." "Audrey," he replied, his eyes assessing me in a way that made me uncomfortable. "You look great. It's been, 10 years?" "Something like that," I replied, though I knew exactly how long it had been since our relationship had ended during our senior year of college. I'd broken things off when I realized we wanted fundamentally different things from life, a decision my mother had never forgiven me for. My mother hurried to set 2 more places at the table, strategically placing Mark next to me. As dinner resumed, Mark dominated the conversation with tales of his success as an investment banker in New York. "The firm made me partner last year," he announced. "Youngest in the company's history. The hours are brutal, but the compensation makes it worthwhile. Just bought a place on Park Avenue." "How impressive," my mother gushed. "Such a stable, prestigious career." The emphasis on stable was not subtle, a clear contrast to my freelance design work. "And are you seeing anyone special, Mark?" my mother asked with artificial casualness. "Focused on my career at the moment," he replied. "Though I'm starting to think about settling down. My parents are eager for grandchildren, as I'm sure you can relate, Mrs. Stanley." "Oh, absolutely," my mother agreed, glancing pointedly in my direction. "There's nothing like grandchildren to complete a family." The setup was so transparent it would have been comical if it weren't so hurtful. My own mother was trying to engineer a reunion with an ex-boyfriend I hadn't seen in a decade, all because he represented the type of life she wanted for me. I felt anger building inside me, a slow burn that was becoming increasingly difficult to contain. I excused myself to use the restroom, needing a moment away from the suffocating atmosphere. In the quiet of the upstairs bathroom, I splashed cold water on my face and took several deep breaths. Sophia's advice echoed in my mind. Set boundaries, don't let them make you feel small. But how a lifetime of patterns wasn't easy to break. When I returned to the table, the conversation had shifted to my brother's children and their achievements. Emma's advanced reading level and Thomas's promising athletic abilities were being detailed for Mark's benefit. "And Audrey?" Mark asked, turning to me with what appeared to be genuine interest. "Catherine mentioned you're still doing design work in Chicago, right?" Before I could answer, my mother jumped in. "Just until she finds something more permanent, I imagine. Audrey had planned to go to medical school, you know. She was pre-med in college." "Mum," I said firmly, "graphic design is my permanent career. It's not a stepping stone to something else." "But surely you must miss the stability of agency work," she pressed. "All this freelancing seems so precarious." "Actually, I'm planning to open my own studio next year." I said the words coming out before I'd intended to share this information. "I've been saving and building a client base. I've already secured commitments from several major clients." There was a moment of silence around the table. My announcement should have been met with congratulations and questions about my plans. Instead, my mother's expression tightened. "A studio in this economy that seems risky, Audrey." "I've done the research and built the connections," I replied, my voice stronger than I expected. "It's a calculated risk with significant potential for growth." "Well," my mother said dismissively, "I suppose you could always go back to agency work if it doesn't pan out." The conversation moved on, but I noticed Mark studying me with newfound interest, as though seeing me properly for the first time that evening. As dessert was being served, my father, perhaps trying to create a more positive atmosphere, asked about my personal life. "So Audrey, your mother mentioned you and Jack split up. How are you doing with all that?" It was an uncharacteristically direct and personal question from my usually reserved father. I appreciated the genuine concern in his voice, though the topic was uncomfortable with Mark sitting beside me. "It was for the best," I said carefully. "Jack is a wonderful person, but we wanted different futures." "He proposed, didn't he?" my mother asked, though she already knew the answer. "Yes," I confirmed. But saying yes would have been unfair to both of us when I wasn't certain. "Certain?" my mother repeated incredulously. "Audrey, at 32, you can't afford the luxury of uncertainty. Jack was stable, employed, ready to start a family. What more certainty do you need?" "I needed to be sure I loved him enough to build a life together," I replied, feeling everyone's eyes on me. "Marriage isn't just about practical considerations." "Love deepens over time," my mother insisted. "Your father and I built our relationship on shared values and goals. All this emphasis on passion and perfect matches is Hollywood nonsense." "It wasn't about passion, Mom," I said, feeling my control slipping. "It was about authenticity, about being true to myself and fair to Jack." "True to yourself," my mother repeated, her tone making the words sound selfish and indulgent. "And where has that gotten you alone at 32 with an unstable career and no prospects?" The room fell uncomfortably silent. Even James looked embarrassed by our mother's bluntness. I noticed Emma and Thomas exchanging worried glances, sensing the adult tension. "Perhaps this isn't the best dinner conversation," my father suggested mildly, but something had broken loose in me, some dam of patience and politeness that had held back years of hurt and frustration. "No, Dad, let's have this conversation," I said, my voice steady, despite my racing heart. "Let's talk about why my choices are constantly under scrutiny while James gets nothing but praise." "That's not fair, Audrey," my mother said sharply. "We're simply concerned about your future. Your brother has made responsible choices." "And I haven't," I challenged. "Because I chose a career that fulfills me, because I didn't marry the first man who asked me. Those aren't irresponsible choices, they're honest ones." The tension in the room was palpable. Catherine murmured something about taking the children upstairs, but my mother waved her off. "They're fine," she said tersely. "This family discussion concerns them too. They should understand the importance of making proper life choices." Those words, proper life choices, ignited something in me. I reached into my bag beside the table and pulled out the carefully wrapped photo album I'd created. "I was going to save this for tomorrow," I said, pushing it across the table toward my mother. "But since we're discussing life choices and family values, now seems appropriate." My mother unwrapped the package with precise movements, her expression neutral, until she opened the album to reveal the carefully designed pages chronicling our family history. "I designed this," I said. I researched our genealogy, scanned old photos, interviewed Dad and Uncle Robert about their childhood-created layouts that tell our family story across 4 generations. "This is what I do, Mum. This is my art and my profession combined." She flipped through a few pages, her expression unreadable. "The binding seems sturdy," she finally commented. "Though I'm not sure about some of these design choices. The layouts are rather busy." It was such a quintessentially Martha Stanley response, focusing on perceived flaws while ignoring the heart and effort of the gift. I felt something inside me deflate, and then surprisingly strengthen. "That album represents hours of skilled work," I said quietly. "Work I'm good at and proud of. Work that clients pay me well for." "It's a lovely hobby," my mother replied, "but hardly a career to stake your future on, especially when you've turned away from more reliable paths." James, perhaps sensing the conversation was veering into dangerous territory, attempted to change the subject. "Remember when Audrey wanted to be a doctor? You were pretty serious about it for a while, weren't you, sis?" It was meant as a diversion, but it provided my mother with fresh ammunition. Yes, she had all the potential. My mother seized on this. Perfect grades, excellent test scores. She could have been a pediatrician or a dermatologist, something with reasonable hours that would have allowed for a family. Instead, I chose to be happy, I finished for her. To do work that energizes me rather than depletes me. Happy, my mother repeated, as if the word was foreign to her. "We all have responsibilities that aren't always happy, Audrey. That's part of being an adult." The condescension in her tone was the final straw. The tension that had been building all evening crystallized into a moment of perfect clarity. I wasn't going to change her, and I was done trying to become someone I wasn't to earn her approval. Oh, I set my napkin beside my plate and looked directly at my mother, summoning a calm I didn't entirely feel. "You know what, Mom? You're right that adulthood comes with responsibilities. My responsibility to myself is to live authentically, not according to someone else's blueprint." My mother's posture stiffened, her back straight as a board, as she set down her dessert fork with a precise click against fine china. "Authentically," she repeated, her voice dripping with disdain. "Such modern nonsense. In my day we understood that life requires sacrifice and practical choices." "And have those sacrifices made you happy, Mom?" I asked quietly. Her eyes flashed with anger. "Happiness isn't the point, Audrey. Security, respectability, family continuity, those are what matter. Your brother understands this." She gestured toward James, who looked deeply uncomfortable at being drawn into the confrontation. "James made choices that aligned with his authentic self," I countered. "He loves medicine. He's a natural caregiver. His life isn't a sacrifice, it's a fulfillment of who he truly is." "And who are you, Audrey?" my mother asked, her voice rising slightly. "A 32-year-old woman with no stability, no family of your own, chasing artistic whims instead of building something lasting." The dining room had gone completely silent. Even Aunt Linda, usually quick with a deflecting joke, sat frozen with her wine glass halfway to her lips. Mark shifted uncomfortably in his seat, clearly regretting his presence at this family implosion. My mother stood suddenly, her napkin falling unnoticed to the floor. Her face was flushed either from the wine or emotion, and her hands trembled slightly as she planted them on the table. "Do you know what it's like," she said, her voice now carrying through the room, "to watch your child deliberately choose a path of struggle, to throw away her potential, to reject every piece of guidance offered out of love and experience?" She looked around the table as if seeking allies, her gaze landing on my father, who was studying his plate intently, then to James, who couldn't meet her eyes, and finally back to me. "I'll tell you what it's like, Audrey. It's heartbreaking. And tonight, watching you defend these choices with such arrogance, I can finally say what I've held back for years." She drew herself up to her full height. "We're ashamed of you." The words hung in the air like shards of glass. I felt each one cut into me, drawing blood from wounds that had never fully healed. My mother wasn't finished. "Ashamed that you walked away from a promising future in medicine. Ashamed that you rejected a good man who could have given you stability. Ashamed that at 32 you have nothing to show but some drawings and a stubborn insistence on following your whims." I heard Emma's small gasp, saw Thomas's wide, frightened eyes, noticed Catherine's hand covering her mouth in shock. James stared at our mother in disbelief, apparently surprised by the rawness of her attack, while my father finally looked up, his expression pained. In that moment, something within me shifted. The hurt was still there, a deep ache that would take time to heal, but alongside it rose a surprising sense of clarity and calm. I realized I'd been seeking approval from someone who fundamentally did not understand or value the person I truly was. I stood slowly, my chair scraping gently against the hardwood floor. I felt oddly light, as if some weight I'd carried for decades had finally been set down. I looked at my mother, really looked at her, perhaps for the first time. I saw beyond the perfectly styled hair and impeccable outfit to the tightness around her eyes, the slight downward turn of her mouth that had become permanent over the years, the tension she carried in her shoulders. I saw a woman who had lived according to others' expectations her entire life and couldn't comprehend any other way of being. Looking directly into my mother's eyes, I took a deep breath and spoke the words that had been forming in my heart for years. "Mom," I said quietly but clearly, "you know what's interesting? I've never felt ashamed of you, not once, despite the fact that you've never given me the unconditional love every child deserves." The room fell completely silent. My mother's expression froze, her mouth slightly open as if she'd been preparing another verbal attack, but my words had stolen her breath. "I've spent my entire life trying to make you proud." I continued, my voice steady and calm. "I earned straight A's in school. I participated in every extracurricular activity you suggested. I even started down a career path I knew would make me miserable, all to earn your approval. But it was never enough, was it?" My mother remained silent, her face beginning to lose its angry flush. "For years I believed there was something fundamentally wrong with me," I said. "That if I just tried harder, achieved more, became more like James, you would finally love me the way I needed to be loved. But I realize now that the problem was never with me." I glanced around the table, noting the varying expressions of shocked discomfort, and on my father's face a dawning recognition. "I'm not ashamed of my career, Mom. I create work that helps businesses connect with people. I solve visual problems. I bring beauty and clarity into the world. My clients value me, even if you don't." I paused, gathering strength for what I needed to say next. "And I'm not ashamed of walking away from Jack. Loving someone means wanting them to have the best possible life, even if that life isn't with you. It would have been selfish to marry him, knowing I wasn't all in, no matter how stable it might have looked from the outside." My voice softened slightly. "But you know what makes me sad? That you measure success only by the most visible conventional markers. That you can't see value in creativity, in emotional honesty, in staying true to oneself." My mother's face had begun to change, the anger giving way to something more complex. Her eyes glistened in the candlelight. "I wonder sometimes," I said, the words coming from a place of genuine curiosity rather than malice, "if you're so hard on me because I represent a path you never let yourself consider. I know Grandma had your life planned out from the beginning, just like you tried to plan mine." I saw something flicker in my mother's eyes, a momentary vulnerability that confirmed I'd touched on a truth. "I love you, Mom. I always have, and I always will," I continued, my voice catching slightly. "But I've realized something important. I can love you without needing your approval. I can honor our family without becoming someone I'm not." I took another breath, looking directly into her eyes as I delivered the words that would change everything. "I know in your heart you've sacrificed so many of your own dreams for this family. And maybe that's why you can't accept that I'm living the kind of life you never allowed yourself to imagine." My mother's hand flew to her mouth. For a second, I thought she might lash out again, but instead I watched in astonishment as tears filled her eyes and spilled over. In 32 years, I had rarely seen my mother cry, and never in front of others. "Audrey," she whispered, her voice breaking on my name. The room remained silent, everyone seemingly frozen in place. My father half rose from his chair, uncertain whether to go to my mother or stay where he was. James stared at his plate, his expression troubled. Even Aunt Linda, usually quick with a comment or joke, sat in stunned silence. I hadn't spoken with any intention to hurt my mother, only to finally speak my truth. Seeing her tears brought me no satisfaction, only a complicated mixture of sadness, relief, and something like hope. I gently pushed my chair back to the table and picked up my purse. "I think I need some air," I said quietly. "Emma Thomas, I'll see you tomorrow morning for presents, okay?" The children nodded solemnly, their young faces concerned and confused by the adult drama unfolding before them. As I turned to leave the dining room, I heard my mother's chair scrape against the floor, but I didn't look back. I retrieved my coat from the front closet and stepped out into the cold December night, the Christmas lights along the street blurring slightly through my own unshed tears. I stood on the front porch, breathing in the sharp winter air, feeling strangely lighter despite the emotional intensity of what had just happened. For the first time in my adult life, I had spoken my complete truth to my mother. Whether it changed anything between us remained to be seen, but I had finally honoured myself in a way I never had before. The front door opened behind me, and I braced myself, expecting my mother, or perhaps my father. Instead, Aunt Linda stepped out, wrapping her cashmere scarf more tightly around her neck. "Mind if I join you?" she asked, not waiting for an answer before lighting a cigarette, something my mother never allowed in her house. "Well, that was quite a dinner speech, kiddo." "I didn't plan it," I said, watching her exhale a stream of smoke into the cold air. "It just happened." "Best things usually do," Linda replied, offering me her familiar crooked smile. "Your mother is upstairs. Your father went after her. Everyone else is sitting in awkward silence, pretending to be fascinated by their dessert." I winced. "I didn't mean to ruin Christmas Eve." "Ruin it?" Linda laughed softly. "Honey, that was the most honest moment this family has had in decades. Long overdue, if you ask me." She took another drag of her cigarette, studying me through the smoke. "You know you remind me of myself at your age. Except you're braver. It took me until I was 40 to stop trying to please everyone else and start living for me." She placed a hand on my shoulder, giving it a gentle squeeze. "I'm proud of you, Audrey. Don't let anyone make you doubt yourself, not even your mother." With that, she crushed out her cigarette and went back inside, leaving me alone with my thoughts under the winter stars. I drove to a nearby hotel that night, unable to face sleeping under my parents' roof. I texted my father to let him know I was safe, receiving only a brief "okay" in response. Whether that terseness reflected anger, confusion, or simply my father's typical communication style was impossible to tell. In my anonymous hotel room, I called Sophia, pouring out the whole story in a rush of words. "I still can't believe I said all that," I concluded, staring at the ceiling. 20 years of therapy condensed into 5 minutes at the Christmas dinner table. "I'm so proud of you," Sophia said warmly. "You stood up for yourself in a way you never have before. How do you feel?" "Honestly?" I considered the question. "Exhausted, sad, relieved, terrified, all of the above." "That sounds about right," she laughed gently. "Standing in your truth is powerful but draining. Get some rest. Whatever happens tomorrow, you've already won the most important battle, which is, you chose yourself, Audrey, maybe for the first time ever." After we hung up, I lay awake for hours replaying the evening in my mind. My mother's harsh words, my unexpected response, her tears. Had I been too harsh? Not harsh enough? Would this rupture heal or widen in the coming days? Eventually, I fell into a fitful sleep, waking early on Christmas morning with a sense of uncertainty about what to do next. Part of me wanted to drive straight back to Chicago, avoiding the awkwardness that would surely accompany any further family interaction. But that would mean breaking my promise to Emma and Thomas about Christmas presents, and whatever issues I had with their parents and grandparents, the children were innocent. After a long shower and a mediocre hotel breakfast, I drove back to my parents' house, arriving just after 9. I sat in the car for several minutes, gathering my courage, before walking up to the front door. This time, instead of ringing the bell, I used my old key. The house was quiet when I entered, though I could hear the children's excited voices coming from the living room. I followed the sound to find Emma and Thomas sitting by the Christmas tree, with my father, who was helping them sort their presents into piles. "Aunt Audrey," Thomas called when he saw me. "Santa came." My father looked up, his expression guarded but not hostile. "Merry Christmas, Audrey. We weren't sure you'd come back." "I promised the kids," I said simply, setting my purse down. "Where is everyone?" "Your mother is still upstairs. James and Catherine are in the kitchen making breakfast. Mark went home last night, and Linda is still asleep in the guest room." I nodded, unsure what to say next. My father saved me from the awkward silence. "The kids wanted to wait for you before opening their gifts from the family. Santa's presents were fair game at dawn, of course." I smiled at that, remembering my own childhood excitement on Christmas mornings. I wouldn't want to keep them waiting any longer then. The next hour passed in a blur of torn wrapping paper and childish exclamations of delight. Emma loved the art supplies I'd bought her, and Thomas was thrilled with the building set that had been difficult to fit in my car. James and Catherine joined us, their manner polite but distant. My mother did not appear. After the presents had been opened and the children were absorbed in their new toys, James approached me. "Can we talk?" he asked quietly, nodding toward the study. I followed him into our father's book-lined sanctuary, preparing myself for a lecture about respecting our mother and keeping the peace. James closed the door and turned to me, his expression serious. "I owe you an apology, Audrey." Of all the things I expected him to say, that wasn't on the list. "What? I've never stood up for you," he said, looking genuinely regretful. "Not last night, not ever really. I've enjoyed my golden child status while watching Mom tear you down for years, and I've never had the courage to intervene." I was momentarily speechless. "What you said last night," he continued, "about living authentically, it made me think about my own choices. I do love medicine, you're right about that, but some of my life decisions have definitely been about meeting expectations rather than following my own path. I didn't say those things to make you feel guilty, James." "I know." He nodded. "You were speaking your truth, as they say, and it made me realize I need to examine mine." He paused, looking uncertain. "Mom's pretty shaken up. Is she angry?" I asked, dreading the answer. "Oddly, no. At least not in the way I expected. She's quiet. Confused, maybe. Dad spent a long time talking with her after you left." He hesitated. "She asked if you were coming back today." "I'm here for the kids," I clarified. "I don't know if Mom and I have anything more to say to each other right now." James nodded in understanding. "For what it's worth, I think what you said needed to be said, even if it's uncomfortable for all of us right now." We rejoined the others, and the day progressed with an undercurrent of tension beneath the holiday activities. We ate breakfast, played with the children, and began preparations for Christmas dinner. My mother finally emerged around noon, her appearance as impeccable as ever, though I noticed a certain redness around her eyes. She greeted everyone politely, even managing a quiet "Merry Christmas" in my direction, but there was no mention of the previous night's confrontation. We moved around each other carefully, like dancers following an unfamiliar choreography. By mid-afternoon, I had decided it was time to leave. I helped clean up after lunch, packed my overnight bag, and prepared to say my goodbyes. As I was hugging Emma and Thomas, promising to video call them soon, my mother appeared in the doorway. "Audrey," she said stiffly, "could I speak with you before you go in the study?" Heart pounding, I followed her into my father's book-lined room for the second time that day. She closed the door and stood facing me, her posture rigid but her eyes uncertain. "I'm not good at this," she began, her voice lacking its usual authority. "Apologies have never been my strong suit." I remained silent, waiting. "What you said last night," she continued, "about my own dreams, it was uncomfortably perceptive." "Achie." She smoothed an imaginary wrinkle from her skirt. "I had wanted to be an architect. Did you know that your grandfather thought it an unsuitable profession for a woman? I was directed toward more appropriate pursuits." This revelation stunned me. My mother had never shared such personal information before. "I don't regret the life I've built," she continued quickly. "Your father, you and James, this home. I'm proud of what I've accomplished. But perhaps I've been too rigid in my vision for you." It wasn't exactly an apology, but from my mother, this level of introspection was unprecedented. "I can't promise to change overnight," she said, meeting my eyes directly. 60 years of thinking a certain way doesn't vanish after one conversation, no matter how impactful. But I will try to listen more and dictate less. I nodded, throat tight with unexpected emotion. "That's all I've ever wanted, Mom. For you to see me, really see me, and respect my choices, even if they're not the ones you would make." "I'm trying," she said quietly. "It's not easy, but I'm trying." It wasn't a perfect reconciliation, not by any measure. Too much had been said and left unsaid over too many years for one conversation to heal all wounds. But it was a beginning, a small crack in the wall that had separated us for so long. As I drove back to Chicago the next day, I felt different, as if the Christmas confrontation had shifted something fundamental within me. I had spoken my truth, set boundaries, and refused to continue old patterns, no matter how familiar they were. The aftermath was still unfolding, the relationship with my mother still evolving, but I had taken the first crucial step toward living as my authentic self in all areas of my life. The months following that Christmas were transformative in ways I couldn't have predicted. I returned to Chicago with a new sense of purpose and clarity, focusing my energy on building my design business and taking care of my emotional well-being. In late January, I received a text message from my father, something so unusual that I initially thought something must be wrong. In Chicago next week for a conference, lunch on Thursday. We met at a small cafe near my apartment. My father, normally so reticent about personal matters, surprised me by asking thoughtful questions about my work and my life in Chicago. For perhaps the first time, I felt he was really seeing me as an adult with her own valid path rather than a daughter who had strayed from the expected route. "Your mother and I have been talking a lot," he said as we finished our meal, "about family dynamics, expectations, the ways we've communicated or failed to communicate over the years." He looked down at his coffee cup, turning it slowly in his hands. "I owe you an apology, Audrey. I should have been a better advocate for you. I saw how your mother's criticism affected you, but I told myself it wasn't my place to interfere. Dad, you don't have to." "I do," he interrupted gently. "Parents are supposed to protect their children, and I failed to protect you from the harm of constant criticism and impossible standards. I'm sorry for that." His sincerity brought tears to my eyes. "Thank you for saying that. It means a lot." "Your mother had a difficult childhood," he continued. "Her parents were even more rigid and critical than she is. It's not an excuse for how she's treated you, but perhaps some context." "She mentioned something about wanting to be an architect," I said. "I had no idea." My father nodded. "She was brilliant at it, had a scholarship to a good program. Her father refused to allow it, said it would make her unmarriageable." He shook his head at the outdated thinking. "She channeled that creative energy into interior design and running her household with precision, but I think there's always been a sense of what might have been." This glimpse into my mother's past helped me understand her better, even if it didn't excuse the years of criticism and comparison. "Is she doing okay?" I asked, realizing I genuinely wanted to know. "She's processing," my father replied carefully. "Your words hit home in ways none of us expected. She's started seeing a therapist, actually. First time in her life." That revelation shocked me more than anything else. My mother, who considered therapy a weakness and emotional problems something to be overcome through sheer willpower, was voluntarily speaking to a mental health professional. "That's wow," I managed. "Indeed," my father agreed with a small smile. "Small steps, Audrey, but steps in the right direction." 2 weeks later, I received an email from my mother. The formality of the communication was typically her, but the content was entirely unexpected. "Dear Audrey," it began, "I've been thinking about our conversation at Christmas. My therapist, yes, I have one of those now, much to my surprise, suggests I need to practice more open communication. She suggested I write to you. I'm not good at this, as you know, but I would like to talk if you're willing. Perhaps a phone call next Sunday, Mother." Our first conversation was awkward, filled with long pauses and careful navigation around sensitive topics. But it was a start. We began speaking weekly short calls at first that gradually lengthened as we slowly, tentatively built a new kind of relationship based on who we actually were, rather than who we thought the other should be. In April, I signed the lease on a small commercial space for my design studio. After years of working from home or shared creative spaces, I finally had a place of my own. I threw myself into renovating the space on a tight budget, painting walls, refinishing floors, and hunting for the perfect furniture to create an environment that reflected my aesthetic and work style. The studio opening was scheduled for early May, a small event for clients, colleagues, and friends. I hesitated before sending an invitation to my parents, unsure whether they would want to come or whether I wanted them there. In the end, I decided that this new chapter in my professional life aligned with the new chapter I was trying to build in my personal relationships. To my surprise, they both agreed to attend. My father's support didn't shock me, but my mother's willingness to fly to Chicago specifically for my studio opening represented a significant shift. The evening of the opening, I was adjusting a display of client work when the door chimed. I turned to see my parents entering, my father looking proud, and more surprisingly, my mother looking genuinely interested in her surroundings. "Audrey, this is lovely," she said, taking in the clean lines, thoughtful layout, and carefully curated examples of my work. "You've done something really special here." Coming from my mother, this was extraordinary praise. I gave them a tour explaining my vision for the business and showing them projects I was particularly proud of. My mother asked thoughtful questions about my design process and business model, engaging with my work in a way she never had before. "I brought something for you," she said after the tour, opening her handbag to remove a small package wrapped in simple silver paper. a studio warming gift. Inside was a beautiful silver frame containing a sketch of a modernist building, the lines bold and confident, despite the yellowing of the paper with age. "I drew this when I was 20, my mother explained, a hint of vulnerability in her voice. "My design for a lakeside arts centre. It was part of my portfolio for architecture school. I studied the sketch, recognizing in the clean lines and thoughtful proportions an aesthetic sensibility not entirely different from my own. It's beautiful, Mum," I said sincerely. "Thank you for sharing this with me." "I thought it might belong here," she said, glancing around my studio, with someone who actually pursued her creative path. It wasn't a perfect resolution to years of complicated family dynamics. My mother still occasionally made comments that stung, still sometimes failed to fully understand my choices. Our relationship remained a work in progress, with steps forward and occasional steps back. But that Christmas confrontation had broken something open between us, creating space for a more honest, more authentic connection. I had learned to set boundaries and speak my truth, while my mother was slowly learning to listen and respect differences. As I look back on that journey now, I realize that the most important gift I gave myself that Christmas wasn't just standing up to my mother, but finally standing up for myself. In saying those difficult words at the dinner table, I had reclaimed my right to define my own success, to chart my own course, to be fully myself without apology. Sometimes, the most powerful thing we can do is speak our truth even when our voice shakes, even when the consequences are uncertain. Because in that moment of authentic self-expression, we reclaim our power and open the door to genuine connection, not based on who others want us to be, but on who we truly are. Have you ever had to stand up for yourself in a way that changed a relationship forever? Share your story in the comments below. If this resonated with you, please hit that like button and subscribe for more real-life stories about finding your voice and honoring your truth. Remember, sometimes the most difficult conversations are exactly the ones we need to have. Thank you for listening to my journey, and may you find the courage to speak your own truth when the moment calls for it.